الله نزل أحسن الحديث كتابا متشابها مثانية تقشعر منه جلود الذين يخشون ربهم.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Welcome to another episode of Quran Circle 11, where we listen to verses of the Quran that we chose that mentions in it women. And it's something that is good to focus on a particular subject or something that is within the verses of the Quran to reflect more. It opens up all kinds of beautiful things and benefits. All of that is based on the authentic knowledge, of course, of the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And the way that we do this, as you're already familiar with it, is that passages of the Quran, and then we talk briefly about it. But also one of the main objectives of the program is to listen to verses of the Quran from recitation that is perfect, according to how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the Quran to the Prophet ﷺ. And we are in Surah An-Noor. And Surah An-Noor is a surah that is very famous and known, that mentions in it many of the adab and the manners and the etiquette, especially with regards to both men and women. And women are mentioned in the verse in the surah in many verses. So we'll do continuing actually with what we did last time with Surah An-Noor, and starting with verse number 27 from Surah An-Noor. But before we do that, I would like to introduce the reciters with us today. We have Sheikh Asad Al-Hawi, welcome to the program, Barakallahu Feekum. And Sheikh Ayman Abdul Mun'im, welcome to the program. Sheikh Ahmed Rajab, Barakallahu Feekum. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you for coming, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless this work and make it sincerely for the sake of Allah. So we'll go straight to the verse, inshallah, verse number 27 in Surah An-Noor to verse number 31. And Sheikh Asad, go ahead and recite for us, inshallah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تدخلوا بيوتا غير بيوتكم حتى تستأنسوا وتسلموا على أهلها ذلكم خير لكم لعلكم تذكرون. فإن لم تجدوا فيها أحدا فلا تدخلوها حتى يؤذن لكم، وإن قيل لكم ارجعوا فارجعوا هو أزكى لكم، والله بما تعملون عليم. ليس عليكم جناح أن تدخلوا بيوتا غير مسكونة فيها متاع لكم، والله يعلم ما تبدون وما تكتمون. قل للمؤمنين يغضوا من أبصارهم ويحفظوا فروجهم ذلك أزكى لهم، إن الله خبير بما يصنعون. وقل للمؤمنات يغضضن من أبصارهن ويحفظن فروجهن ولا يبدين زينتهن إلا ما ظهر منها، وليضربن بخمرهن على جيوبهن ولا يبدين زينتهن إلا لبعولتهن أو آبائهن أو آباء بعولتهن أو أبنائهن أو أبناء بعولتهن أو إخوانهن أو بني إخوانهن أو بني أخواتهن أو نسائهن أو ما ملكت أيمانهن أو التابعين غير أولي الإربة من الرجال أو الطفل الذين لم يظهروا على عورات النساء ولا يضربن بأرجلهن ليعلم ما يخفين من زينتهن وتوبوا إلى الله جميعا أيها المؤمنون لعلكم تفلحون.
MashaAllah, barakallahu feekum, jazakumullah khairan for the beautiful recitation. Surah An-Noor is a surah that definitely needs to be studied, and for every Muslim and families and both men and women to study these etiquettes and these manners to be observed. So some of these manners are mentioned in these verses when it comes to seeking permission before entering a house. And this is from verse number 27 and afterwards, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls the believers to observe these manners. And this is a mandatory thing, that if they enter homes that it's not theirs, is to seek permission before they enter, and then they give the salam. And they give the salam to its people, and this is what is best for them. And if there's no one there, then do not enter these homes till you are given the permission to enter. So there's no such a thing as just walking into a place, but rather to seek permission and to make and to give the salam. And as it's mentioned, that this, what's meant by that is so that the person does not see something that is not permissible for the person to see. That's one of the main objectives of this. Why? To protect the honor and dignity of both men and women, especially women being in their homes. This is their place, and this is where they are at ease, because once they leave their houses, they observe the hijab. So inside of their homes, they are at ease when it comes to their clothing and what they wear. So that's why if a stranger comes, someone comes, then they need to seek permission and to give the salam before they enter. Because of that reason, this is the main reason. And that's why if it's a place where it's for everyone to enter, then there's no such a thing as permission when a person would enter a store, for example, and the like of this. That's why right after that, another etiquette is mentioned, which is for the believing men and the believing women to lower their gaze. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded the believers to lower their gaze. قُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ يَغُضُّوا مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِمْ وَيَحْفَظُوا فُرُوجَهُمْ, and to protect their private parts, to have chastity and modesty. And one leads to the other if it's not observed. And this is what purifies them. Otherwise, if a person doesn't lower the gaze from women, if it's a man, to whenever there's a woman that is not someone that is blood related, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stated in verse number 31, those who are forbidden for the man, this is where he can see and look and so on. If it's not them, then it's a mandatory thing to lower the gaze. This is to purify the hearts. And if a person doesn't do that, then the heart becomes contaminated with this sinful act of looking at things that is not permissible for the person, whether it's physically or virtual or in the phones or whatever there is. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best what's in the hearts and well acquainted of what everybody does. And therefore also the command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the believing women, this is in a separate verse, also to lower their gaze and to protect their private parts and to protect their chastity and not to show their adornment. And this is an ayah, there is an evidence for the hijab, for the women to observe what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded them to observe, to cover their body, and not to show their beauty and what adorns them, except to these specific individuals that are mentioned in the verse. So these are the ones only for the women to, doesn't have to wear hijab in front of them. Husbands, their fathers, the father of their husbands, their sons, the sons of their husbands, their brothers, the sons of their brothers, the sons of their sisters, the women, the like of them, and those who are slaves, or those who have no desire, and this is something that with specific conditions, or the child that is still in the age where he's not aware of the beauty of women and the things of that nature. And also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded them to hide any form of beauty, even when it comes to them walking, and they would wear a leg bracelet, for example, that would make noise and sound. And this is something that after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned this, and He knows best what's in the hearts of both men and women. And for women, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala command them to observe these obligations, you don't have to analyze it. You don't have to see what's the effect of that on men, or does it really affect them or not. They need to lower their gaze and don't worry about the women. Worry about your own self. Meaning, this is a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the believing men, so the men, they should apply what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said. Don't try to analyze it, but I'm different, I'm this and that. Allah knows best. And the same thing when the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes to the women to wear the hijab, to observe it, then to submit oneself to the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as He said, He's well acquainted of what you do. And then at the end of the verse, calling the believers, both men and women, to repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that they would attain the success in this life and in the hereafter. Without repentance, the success is not attained. So therefore, the constant repentance to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with every speech, with every action, in all of our affairs. We continue inshallah ta'ala with the next set of verses, which is verse number 32 and 34. From 32 to 34 from Surah An-Noor. And Sheikh Ayman, go ahead and recite for us inshallah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وأنكحوا الأيام منكم والصالحين من عبادكم وإمائكم إن يكونوا فقراء يغنهم الله من فضله والله واسع عليم وليستعفف الذين لا يجدون نكاحا حتى يغنيهم الله من فضله والذين يبتغون الكتاب مما ملكت أيمانكم فكاتبوهم إن علمتم فيهم خيرا وآتوهم مما لله الذي آتاكم ولا تكرهوا فتياتكم على البغاء إن أردنا تحصنا لتبتغوا عرض الحياة الدنيا ومن يكرههن فإن الله من بعد إكراههن غفور رحيم ولقد أنزلنا إليكم آيات مبينات ومثلا من الذين خلوا من قبلكم ولقد أنزلنا إليكم آيات مبينات ومثلا من الذين خلوا من قبلكم وموعظة للمتقين.
Inshallah, barakallahu feek. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you. And as you see here, this is a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the guardian and those who are responsible to get their women married. The one that is not married, to get her married. And also to get those who are men, to get them married. This is a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is for those who are commanded to protect themselves and to guard their chastity. Then for them to be left like this without marriage, and they have to endure patience when it comes to lowering the gaze and so on. This is against human nature to stay like this without marriage. So this is something for the believers they need to realize. They need to make sure that in their communities, and when it comes to their dependencies, they make sure that everyone is married. Not to leave someone like this without marriage And this is all by the will of Allah, of course, but to take the means. And this is what the ayah, basically what the verse is saying. And with righteousness, because otherwise if they're not righteous, then the matter can be a very difficult one. And if people think, when it comes to financial being, but they're poor, or marriage might make them even poorer, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Most High, the Creator of the heavens and the earth, He says, إِن يَكُونُوا فُقَرَاءَ يُغْنِيهِمُ اللَّهُ مِنْ فَضْلِهِ. If they are poor, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will enrich them from His bounty. So that's why, as Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, he said, how can someone listen and hear this verse and doesn't get married? Because marriage is one of the means of even making more money, of having more provisions. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised the believers, especially when their intentions is to protect their deen, is to have the fear of Allah, to be obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we have to take the Quran one verse after the other without separating the meanings here. So the previous verses, the command of Allah to lower the gaze, the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to observe the hijab. So therefore, marriage among the believers should be encouraged. People should make sure that they are getting married and not to leave someone without marriage to the best of their ability. And that's why the next verse talks about those who are not having the means to get married, because of course they have to have some minimum requirement for them to get married. And as the Prophet ﷺ stated that, and when he said, مَنِ اسْتَطَاعَ مِنْكُمُ الْبَاءَةَ فَلْيَتَزَوَّجْ, and he was addressing the young ones, whoever is able to have the means of marriage, whether it's physical means or financial means. So if they don't have these means, then to be patient, to have al-afaf, that means to chastise themselves, to be away from anything that is sinful, till Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would enrich them from His bounty subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the verses talks more again about these types of etiquettes and the rulings, and even for those who at the time when they were slaves, to make sure that they also honor them and to get them married, and not to force them to do anything that is not permissible. And these are ayat, verses from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that are revealed, very clear, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings the examples and the parables from those who before, an admonition and a reminder for the people of taqwa, the people of the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those who are righteous. So this is the right perception, this is the right understanding, unlike those who would follow the ways of the disbelievers and their lifestyle and the way that they do things. The believers are different because they have to observe the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why they ought to make the matter easy for themselves when it comes to marriage and the like of this. We continue inshallah ta'ala with more verses in Surah An-Noor and verses 58 to 61. 58 to 61. And Sheikh Ahmed, go ahead and recite for us inshallah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا ليستأذنكم الذين ملكت أيمانكم والذين لم يبلغوا الحلم منكم 3 مرات من قبل صلاة الفجر وحين تضعون ثيابكم من الظهيرة ومن بعد صلاة العشاء. 3 عورات لكم ليس عليكم ولا عليهم جناح بعدهن طوافون عليكم بعضكم على بعض كذلك يبين الله لكم الآيات والله عليم حكيم. وإذا بلغ الأطفال منكم الحلم فليستأذنوا كما استأذن الذين من قبلهم كذلك يبين الله لكم آياته والله عليم حكيم. والقواعد من النساء اللاتي لا يرجون نكاحا فليس عليهن
جناح أن يضعن ثيابهن فليس عليهن جناح أن يضعن ثيابهن غير متبرجات بزينة وأن يستعففن خير لهن والله سميع عليم ليس على الأعمى حرج ولا على الأعرج حرج ولا على المريض حرج ولا على أنفسكم أن تأكلوا من بيوتكم أو بيوت آبائكم أو بيوت أمهاتكم أو بيوت إخوانكم أو بيوت أخواتكم أو بيوت أعمامكم أو بيوت عماتكم أو بيوت أخوالكم أو بيوت خالاتكم أو ما ملكتم مفاتحه أو صديقكم ليس عليكم جناح أن تأكلوا جميعا أو أشتاتا فإذا دخلتم بيوتا فسلموا على أنفسكم تحية من عند الله مباركة طيبة كذلك يبين الله لكم الآيات لعلكم تعقلون.
ما شاء الله. بارك الله فيك. جزاكم الله خيرا. Again, with these adab and these manners that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching the believers, and especially with the relationship between men and women, and as mentioned that seeking permission to enter into a room or into a house, the main objective of it is so that the person doesn't see something that is not permissible for a person to see. And even within the same household, within the same family, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded the believers that those who are your servants or the children that did not reach yet the age of puberty, they should be taught to take permission at 3 times, which is the times of your privacy, and for them to be taught such a thing, especially at these 3 times. Other than these 3 times, the matter, you should not make it difficult for them. So, but these 3 times were children even to be taught that they don't enter unless they take permission, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned it in verse number 58, which is before Salatul Fajr, when people would normally take their clothes and to be at ease with their clothings, and when the same thing at the time of Dhuhr time, the qaylula, the short nap that a person would take in midday, and after Salatul Isha. And after Salat al-Isha, these are the 3 times which is private for you. And even though at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, they did not used to have doors for every room. So that means it shows the importance of the permission. So this is what they seek permission, and even if a person doesn't have a door in the room, still people should take permission, and the permission is made for the eyes. Not that a person is standing in front of the door and looking inside and saying, "Can I enter?" He already entered. He entered with his own eyes. So the child is to be taught that if there is no door for the room, is to stay on the side and not to look inside of the room, and to seek permission before he can enter. And the permission, that means he would be told, yes, come in, before he would be able to enter. And that's why once they reach the age of puberty, then they have to seek permission at all times, like what's mentioned before. Then the verses talks about the women, those who reached olden age, where they don't seek marriage and no one would seek them for marriage. Then there's no harm from them if they ease the conditions and the things of the hijab to a certain extent, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned. And if they would continue to observe it in the most perfect way, it's what's best for them. And this is something by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to show that the objective of these actions is to protect people from the evil within their own selves. So if they reach a very old age, then there's no harm on them, as it's mentioned. Another etiquette that is to be observed, when the Sahaba radiallahu anhum used to be in a state of unease whenever they go to a place of the relatives and so on, and they would whether to eat from the food that is there or not, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the matter clear to them that there's no harm if you eat, whether food from your homes, from your parents, from your mother's homes, your brothers, your sisters, your aunts and your uncles from both sides, the mother and the father, or you have a place that you own its keys, to be at ease with it, so that you don't feel like you're sinful if you're eating. But this is without opening something that is closed or searching or anything, just to be at ease with things. But then reminding them that if you enter the homes of others, then you give salam to the people. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned this, that it's salam to yourself, because the believers are only one, as if they are one body. So to give the salam to them by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make the signs and the verses clear for you, so that you would attain the piety and the righteousness, and to observe and to conduct yourself and your actions according to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from you. So here, as you see, the wahy, the revelation from Allah, the Quran, doesn't leave us like that to act according to what people would invent from their own, but rather this is how the deen is, this is how the religion is. So it doesn't matter whether you are from the west or the east or the south or the north, different cultures, these matters are religion. They have to be taught, and we have to learn them, and we have to practice them, and we have to make sure that we implement that in our homes and teach our children these types of etiquettes and behaviors. That is part of the deen of Islam. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us benefit from what we hear, and to make us among those who are steadfast upon the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Before we end, I would like to thank the reciters. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you for coming. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this in the balance of your good deeds. And we'll continue inshallah ta'ala next time with more verses of other surahs. So till next time, I leave you with the protection of Allah. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
الله نزل أحسن الحديث كتابا متشابها مثانية تقشعر منه جلود الذين يخشون ربهم مثانية تقشعر منه جلود الذين يخشون ربهم ثم تلين جلودهم